Well, I'm super excited to be here and be part of what I understand is the kickoff event for this group, and also be the first speaker in your speaker series for the rest of the year. So I'll try and set a very low bar so that anybody who comes after me, you're like, oh my God, she's so much better than that lady who was here at the beginning. I want to tell you a little bit about my organization and myself. The President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities is an advisory committee to the White House on cultural policy. It was created in 1982 by President Reagan. The members consist of public officials, so there are 12 members that serve ex officio, and those are individuals that serve in their appointed capacity, and these include the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Education, the Administrator of the GSA, the General Services Administration, which funds all the public architecture and artwork at the federal level, the Chairman of the Endowment for the Arts, the Chairman of the Endowment for the Humanities, and the head of the Kennedy Center, and the head of the National Gallery, the Secretary of the Smithsonian, etc., and then a bunch of private citizens that are appointed by each administration. President Reagan, on his committee, I think he appointed Frank Sinatra, so I'm sorry that I missed that one. But I was lucky to get an amazing group of individuals appointed to this committee with me, folks, incredible artists, people like Chuck Close and Yo-Yo Ma and Jhumpa Lahiri and Forrest Whitaker, amazing and hard women to hang around like Sarah Jessica Parker and Anna Wintour and Kerry Washington. I swear this job should have come with an accessory budget because it's really hard to, you just can't keep up. But also, in addition to the working artists on the committee, we have philanthropists, entrepreneurs, people from the social sector, people who have spent their lives committed to the arts and humanities in their private lives and are now doing this as their public service. Our main focuses are in education, arts and humanities education, cultural diplomacy, and what we call creative economy, helping cities and towns invest into their cultural and artistic infrastructure to drive tourism and investment in their communities and tax bases and attract businesses. I was talking to your professor in cultural policy. How many of you have had this lady as a professor? All right. So you talked about what cultural policy is. We're supposed to advise on cultural policy at the President's Committee, which is a wildly wide open brief. And in our first couple of years, I did everything with the committee, from getting involved in trying to help performing arts organizations expedite H-1 visas for performing artists that they wanted to bring into the United States, and the process was completely broken because it was taking so long, and they were getting very arbitrary decisions because it's a very subjective measurement. And so the White House and the President's Committee got involved and brought in the relevant agencies and got them to do special training for the visa inspectors and get literally like a red hotline. So if the Lincoln Center's, their performance was 2 weeks away and they still hadn't gotten the visa for their Chinese dance troupe, they could call this number. We got involved in some of the very difficult issues around ivory and banning imports of ivory, which were extrapolated to mean that musicians couldn't carry violins that were 150 years old but had ivory in the bridge. We got involved in helping the Department of Education write the grant language for Promise Neighborhoods, which was a large grant program kind of based on the Harlem Children's Zone. And helping them craft preference language around cultural elements of grants that they were looking for, so to encourage people to think about the cultural ramifications of their plans and bring in cultural partners to their consortium. Everything from that to, I would get weird calls from, the president went to China. I got a call from the Chinese ambassador who was in D.C. who they were trying to figure out the music that they would play at the first reception when he walked in, and they wanted to play American music, but they didn't know what he liked. So would he like Stevie Wonder, or would he like more, and I, like I'm going to pick up the bat phone and go like, yo, President Obama, I'm just wondering what's on your playlist these days. So I don't know that counts as cultural policy, but it was one of the more amusing moments. So the committee does lots and lots of different things. And just a little bit about myself, I was probably well prepared for this because I did a lot of different things in my life. As President Furman mentioned, I started out as a theater geek in high school and college. Graduated with majors in literature and poli-sci. Went to law school, became a lawyer, became an intellectual property lawyer, worked in international copyright law, worked with the WTO, and ended up at the U.S. government at the U.S. Copyright Office doing international policy and congressional affairs, helped write the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and then went back to school, actually at NYU, to study documentary film. And so I was a lawyer for about 8 years, and then I was a documentary filmmaker for about 8 years, and started out in television, doing things as disparate as directing this fantastic National Geographic series that had me living with nomadic horse herders in the steppes of Mongolia, to being the story producer on the first season of Dog the Bounty Hunter. I don't know how many of you remember that, but it's always the first thing they mention in newspaper articles about me. Like, she was a documentary filmmaker, such as Dog the Bounty Hunter, and I keep wanting them to mention the National Geographic or PBS work. And then I went into making theatrical releases, got into arts administration, ran a film festival for a while, worked for PBS on helping them figure out how to get more of their independent documentary content online at a time where there was Hulu and there was iTunes and there were a bunch of other platforms that have disappeared, and so they brought me in to help them figure out a strategy for getting independent content online. So I was doing all of this and working on films when I got asked to take this job. And the great thing about this job, well, I have the best job in the world in many ways, but it pulls in all of my different skills to the extent that I have any. You know, it pulls in my sort of logical, sequential law brain and my crazy, up for anything adventure brain, my ability to, you know, through making documentaries, to handle a lot of different people and get a lot of different people to do things for me. It requires me to tell a story, which is actually both law and documentary filmmaking. It turns out it's about telling stories. So that's about me, and that's about the PCH, which is, you know, not as well known as some other agencies, but is really fantastic. It is the only table in Washington, D.C., where all of the different agencies that have a role in culture, you know, from the Department of State and to the Department of Education to the National Gallery, sit down at the same table. And then you also have, so in that way, it's the closest thing we have to a Ministry of Culture. And then you also bring in the private members, and it's the closest thing you have to sort of an intersection to a public-private partnership in the arts and humanities. So I like to think of it as a mini Ministry of Culture or SWAT team that wears really great shoes. So I'm here today for two reasons, and first is that Elizabeth Metz asked me to. Elizabeth was an intern for us this summer at the President's Committee, and in a sea of interns, she quickly established herself as the one to watch. She became an indispensable part of our team, and you guys have all done internships, so you know how to do this, but she just did a great job at taking initiative, at being constantly curious, at really jumping in with both feet, and always having a really positive attitude. So there may have been some leg clinging when she left us to come back here, but it was so exciting to be able to follow her back here and do this. And the second reason is that I really feel a deep affinity with everybody here in this room. You may all be much younger than me and much cooler than me and have much better Instagram accounts than me. Yeah, mine are mostly work and my family, my kids, like, you know, oh, please put up more pictures of your kids on vacation, said nobody ever. But that being aside, I think we are alike in some more important ways. We both are trying to balance our left brains and our right brains, right? There's a part of us that loves to be creative and open-ended and live life out loud. And then there's the part of us that likes to get stuff done and likes to think deeply and organize things and get into the nitty-gritty. We want a life of passion, but we also want a life of impact. And that's a really amazing place to be. And people that have that capacity, you know, we all know people who are all left brain or who are all right brain, and Lord knows this world needs those people too. But people who find themselves in this field, in the arts, but in administration or in education, it's like you're looking for a way to marry the creativity and the passion and the expansiveness of the arts with real-world, solid impact and structure. And that's a really interesting place to be, and there's a lot of great jobs in that sector, and there's a lot of important work to be done. So to be successful, as I was thinking about what to say here, I wanted to say, I guess, that to be successful in the field of arts policy or arts education, you really have to do two things, and they're very complicated. You have to speak up, and you have to do things smartly. And that's it. I just want to talk a little bit about both of these. So you have to speak up. You know, part of, I think, the mandate of this group is to do advocacy, and I cannot overemphasize how important that is, not only to the field, but to yourself professionally. Advocacy matters, and when things are happening that affects the world you work and live in, you want to be in the room where the conversations and the decisions that are going to impact those outcomes are being made or are being had. Conversations are being had and the decisions are being made. The grammar is not important. You want to know what's going on. If you're an arts administration, you want to know what's going on in tax breaks for your organizations, or the larger conversation about whether, charitable deductions are going to be, charitable contributions are going to be tax deductible. You're going to live and die by those things. If you're in education, you want to be in a room where they're talking about accountability and assessment, and when they're talking about how they're going to fund, whether they're going to give schools autonomy over their funding so principals can hire whoever they want, or they're going to tell them who to hire. These are really vital conversations. And you want to be in that room not only because you'll know more, and this will allow you to see farther ahead than your colleagues and to know more than your colleagues and to be able to anticipate things more effectively, but you want to be in the room because you'll be seen as a player in these conversations. You will meet people that are important, that will want to hire you, that will be interested in, that will find your opinion smart and interesting. You will network, you'll be on the radar of a whole bunch of different people. And you yourself will become a more accomplished professional in your field by spending time on things that are not directly in your job description that you need to do as a student or as a professional. It's also important for the field. I can't tell you, before I got into government, and I'm not a political animal, I now, write a letter to your senator, sign this petition, make this phone call, and I just thought, yeah, right, like that's for me, right? It doesn't matter. Nobody's listening. And the crazy thing about being in DC is that people actually listen. They don't listen to the right things necessarily, because often the people with the most money or the loudest, most irrational opinions are the ones making most of the noise. But I can't tell you how many times, like, we get a call from a congressman who's like, I've gotten 3 letters about this turnaround arts program in my state, and I want to know more about it. 3 letters. How many letters have these congressmen? Or I had this teacher come in and talk to me, and she got me thinking, and blah blah blah. Or I don't get a call from them. I get a call from their staff member, and they ask me to come in and brief them. The White House calls me, and they're like, in a town hall, somebody asked the president about blah blah blah, and he brought up turnaround arts, but we really want to know more about it. In one question, one smart comment, one office visit actually has all these repercussions, not necessarily every time, but a critical mass of times that you should be doing them about things you care about. In this room, I'm assuming that the things you care about are the arts, but if you care about child slavery or malaria treatment, or, one thing I just want to tell you, coming from the hallowed halls of government, is people really pay attention to the people that get their attention. And so you should be trying to get people's attention on issues that you care about. So think of yourself like James Bond. You are our only hope. Or maybe, I don't know, James Bond's probably too old for you guys. Guardians of the Galaxy, that Chris Pratt guy with the cool music. So the other thing you need to do, is aside from speak up, is you need to do things. And more importantly, you need to do things more smartly. Wow, this is not a good grammar day for me. I just have to say this. You have to do things smartly. When Elizabeth and I were talking about what I could share with you guys that would be valuable, she talked about maximizing resources and how impressed she had been from seeing our Turnaround Arts program from the inside, how good of a job we did at maximizing our resources and making our case. And so I just wanted to spend a second on that and really just use maybe Turnaround Arts as a case study to talk to you a little bit about that, because you're all going to go out into the world and you're going to want to do stuff. You're going to want to start programs. You're going to want to take over organizations. You're going to want to build something. And you should. Like, you are the generation that is going to do that. And how you do that is going to be incredibly relevant to whether or not it's a success. So the first thing to do is, so let me talk about Turnaround Arts. So we're sworn in August, September of 2009, after the president was sworn in January. And we're a presidential advisory committee, and the dirty secret about presidential advisory committees is they don't actually have to do anything. I'm not like, if I was appointed to be the head of the DMV, I would know that my job was to issue licenses and registrations and teach all my employees to say, "I'm sorry, ma'am, you're in the wrong line." But when you're appointed to run a presidential advisory committee, and the president, the White House is like, we're going to focus on healthcare and TARP and the economic recession. So you go out and you do something good and let us know what you need to do. We want to be helpful. It's like you have this limousine, but you have no map. You don't have a destination. You don't get a destination. So we take office, and the national conversation is about education, right? It's race to the top. It's waiting for Superman. It's the peaking of the charter school movement. It's the teacher evaluation movement is starting to hit. All of this is going on at the time. And it's a really interesting, important conversation, and the arts are nowhere in the conversation, right? The arts do not have a seat at that table. There's arts education, and then there's education. And we as a committee, had the strong inclination that the arts should be part of that conversation. But at the same time, we have to be strategic, right? So I'm meeting with the Department of Ed and figuring out what's important to them. I'm meeting with the First Lady and figuring out of all the things we do, what is the most important to her. I have folks on my committee like Yo-Yo Ma and Chuck Close and Sarah Jessica Parker, who have all been active in arts education in their private lives before being appointed to this committee. And I have 2 kids in DC public schools. And all of this kind of comes together. Are we going to keep doing lots of different things that this committee has kind of done over the years, or are we going to go deep and invest in something? And so we decided to make arts education a focus for this administration. And we spent 2 years and surveyed the landscape. We realized we had no credibility. Who's this fancy pants celebrity committee coming in telling us, all these people who went to college for this and have been working in this field for 25 years, what to do? So we took 2 years. We hired experts. We traveled around the country. We visited schools and state legislatures and superintendents. We talked to neuroscientists, and we put out a report called Reinvesting in Arts Education that allowed us to really refine our judgment. And what we noticed was there was a tremendous energy around school reform and school improvement, right? How do you fix the lowest performing 5% of schools in this country? The Department of Education was paying attention to that. The Gates Foundation was paying attention to that. The Ford Foundation was paying attention to that. The president was paying attention to that. This was a huge hotbed of both funding and interest. And we realized that there hadn't really ever been a focus on what role, if any, arts education might have had to play in that space. Not arts for all, not STEM to STEAM, not the arts are good for the soul, and every child should have it, all of which we totally believe in. But we had to pick a basket and put our eggs in it. And at that time, especially with a lot of really interesting research had come out, that intersection of school reform and the arts was untouched by anybody else. There was a lot of energy around that piece of it. And we thought we had something to say, right? That nobody had really looked at or synthesized until our report, that there was a really strong database case to be made that arts education actually has a huge impact in school culture and climate, and in achievement, and in student engagement and parent engagement, which were all things that the field was looking for. So we put together this program, and then, it's easy to say maximize resources when your resources include being able to pick up the phone and call the Secretary of Education or having Sarah Jessica Parker on your committee. But we figured out a way to use our artists in a way that was meaningful for them and that was helpful for the program. We got each of our artists on the committee to adopt a school and be a turnaround artist as a way to drive visibility and momentum and press for the program. And we figured out a media strategy. We got great firm to donate time to help us come up with a media plan, to have a big launch. I pulled in the favors that I'd spent several years building up at the White House to, get some senior White House officials to be involved in the launch, and I managed to hire the most amazing person in the world, Miss Kathy Fletcher, to run the program. She was actually in the beginning. She helped me. We really created it together. And through that, we managed to put together a program. And then over the years, we managed to build it and build it. So in the last 4 years, we started in 2011, really. We started with the program, but we didn't start working in schools until 2012. We started out in 8 schools. We're now in 50 schools across the country. We started with a budget of $325,000. We now have about a $2.5 million annual budget, which leverages about $8 million in local district funding that are going into arts education in clusters of low-performing schools in 15 states. We went from our 8 little PCH artists that were on our committee to 37 artists that are now working with us and working in schools, everybody from Elton John to Jason Mraz to Elizabeth Banks to Jesse Tyler Ferguson to Cameron Diaz to Misty Copeland. And these are all, we've given them kind of a purpose and a focus, and so they each adopt a school and get to work in those schools. We do professional development for all of our schools, both on-site, and then we bring teams of teachers and principals to a professional development conference for 6 days. And over the years, we bring art supplies and musical instruments and rights to perform musicals and all kinds of different kind of resources and materials into our schools. We make it a requirement that our schools have full-time arts or music teachers on staff, which often is a stretch for them, but because they get so many goodies, so for instance, we work in Compton in Los Angeles, and the Compton School District has 32 elementary schools, only one has a music teacher, and that's the Turnaround Art School, and that teacher was hired because they wanted to be part of this program. So figuring out the points of inflection for districts with the White House, with our partners, the Department of Ed, the Department of Education, started out just coordinating this program with us. Over time, they have started to fund us and now increase their funding by millions and millions of dollars because we've proved the point. We've been pretty strategic at making our case. That's another thing you need to think about. You can do things smartly, and then you need to show people that you're doing things smartly. So early on, we brought in Booz Allen Hamilton and the University of Chicago to do an evaluation of our pilot schools. The Kennedy Center would have done it for free. There's a couple places that would have done it, for free, and that would have been much easier, but they were arts education evaluations, and I wanted the blue chip. If Booz Allen says this is working, then it must be working, or University of Chicago, or Columbia. So making decisions like that, making decisions like we don't let our artists do press unless they agree to also interview the principal and a student. We don't want this to be the program where Sarah Jessica Parker came to a school today and she was wearing, Hugo Boss. And so we work really hard on our media to make sure that every article that goes out has information about how attendance went up at that school, has a story about a kid who was about to drop out and then found the trumpet, has a picture of a classroom with a really vibrant environment. You always have to be conscious of your audience, and so under mostly Kathy's direction, we've done a great job of keeping the strategy of who we want to reach and what case we want to make, first and foremost. So anyway, I am not an expert on all of this, and I could go on and on. I would really like to hear from you guys and answer any questions and learn more about what you want to be when you grow up. But I would just say, you got to find your resources. You got to figure it out. You got to figure out what you're trying to prove, right? It was so tempting. People wanted us to talk about STEAM, and people wanted to talk about arts for all, and we kept having to say, this is a school reform program. This is not an arts education program. This is a school reform program that uses arts education. And that distinguished us. That delineated. We left other stuff on the table because there were people that would have given us money to do STEAM, to bring, focus STEAM in our schools. And we had to keep our eye on what were we trying to prove. We were trying to prove that the arts were not a hindrance when you're trying to turn around a low-performing school, but they were actually a help, that they weren't some beautiful thing that you only give students when you can afford it or they can afford it. They're actually a way to solve problems. The motto of this program is the arts are not a flower, they're also a wrench. And so keeping that in mind, figuring out what we needed to prove, proving it with hard data, and then proving it with soft data, with the stories and the anecdotes and the, puff pieces in the local paper about, about how this was changing the school. And we've had, as I said, really heartening success in all of these areas. So in closing, I would say head and heart, right? That's why we're here. We all are a mixture of being in our heads and being in our hearts. That's who we are. And that mixture is really powerful. So stay true to that as you go out into the world and you do what you want to do. When you go to the Hill and you're an advocate, make sure what you say has some head and some heart in it. And when you start your programs, you take over that struggling organization and you turn it into a powerhouse. Like, always keep both of those in mind, because that's why you're in this field. You're not all head and you're not all heart. And if you stay true to that, you won't fail. So thank you, and I'd love to take any questions.